Oh, hello, ladies and gentlemen. God darn, somebody's going to prison today, and it ain't me. Now, why is somebody going to prison? Well, it's a long, complicated story, but one that I want to bring to you because, frankly, I love video game modification. I love modifying game systems. Some of the best content I think I've ever made on this platform has always been when I was hacking game systems. Very recently, I sat down and, ran some homebrew on a PlayStation 4, okay? This little bad boy here that I've been playing some Elden Ring on. Now, to understand, when these consoles are out of the loop, when new systems come by, I frankly firmly believe it's 100% morally okay to run third-party code on here. The only thing that I don't promote is piracy, because piracy is wrong, okay? It's just we're gonna get off with, okay? The lawyers told me to say that, and my own moral conviction did too. But that said, though, Nintendo is a special company that when you get involved with them, and you even talk about the words ROMs, and you even talk about the word circumvention, Nintendo's going to be on you harder than an X, okay? That's pretty much what you're jumping into in this situation. Now, I've talked about the story before, where we looked at ROM hacking websites, but one that I actually have my toe dipped into was the SXOS system. Now, to understand, there's a company known as Team Executor, an old group from back in the day. Now, before anybody questions the legitimacy of certain groups like this, Team Executor has been around since the days of the PlayStation 1. Yes, longer than some of you have been alive. When the PlayStation 1 was new, my balls didn't even drop yet, okay? So the PlayStation 1, they made a few hardware mods for it. They made hardware mods for the PlayStation 2, the original Xbox, which is I think where their peak was, the Xbox 360, and various other systems. Now, to understand, modifying and running chips is something that has been part of these consoles ever since their inception. Typically, systems come with copy protection, so you can't just burn PlayStation 1 games, stick them into a PlayStation 1 disk drive, and run them that way. There's various factors to consider, okay? Each disk is printed differently, there's a bit of copy protection you have to play around with. So there's a few ways to circumvent this, and one of them was running the game with mod chips, or running mod chips on the actual hardware. A little extra bonus to the hardware that would help circumvent the built-in copy protection features. I guess if it's one thing that I can always sort of show you, it's mod chips and flash cards. Now, for instance, if you ever owned a DS, you've probably heard of companies known as R4, okay? There's various flash card producers, but I own flash cards for various systems that I have. Not because I like to promote piracy or anything, it's because I have hundreds of DS games. So what I do is I back them up, I put them onto one little micro SD card on the actual, R4 card, so you can see they got a little micro SD. You put it in, and you can actually run old DS games on your system, okay? So instead of carrying 100 cartridges, you can back up your games and put them into one cartridge. I was gonna play things, but the actual 3DS is dead, so I might have just left it on pause when I was playing Etrian Odyssey. But yeah, this is a way for you to run stuff, okay? And just one thing for sure, I didn't know the paint could peel off on a 3DS. But if you ever have younger people in your family who ever touch your tech products, just understand this will always happen in some capacity. I'm still actually pretty miffed on it, by the way, but let's ignore things. Now, piracy is something that obviously costs money, okay? Let's be real here. Every time there's a speck of piracy, there is money to be lost, okay? Don't get me wrong. Did the DS lose money because of piracy? Yeah, there's quite a few people that downloaded Pokemon ROMs, Super Mario ROMs, various video game ROMs out there. But I like to imagine that piracy, because of the inconvenience of buying flashcards, wasn't something that was so heavily prevalent that it took away from the billions upon billions of dollars that Nintendo would earn. Companies like the PlayStation, which released the PSP and the Vita, typically some would say that piracy is what killed those systems, but I like to think that their competition with Nintendo, who is already a dominant player in the portable section, the portable gaming market, they were honestly on the biggest uphill battle for a while. The PSP was a great system. You had games like Grand Theft Auto Vice City Stories. You had games like Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker. Unfortunately, you didn't have games that slapped as hard as Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, or really Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. Frankly, it's the software and, how affordable some of that hardware is to the average person, and the DS kicked that department out. So again, piracy, while it's important, I want to address the fact that yes, money can be lost. But let's not take away from the fact that these companies make billions upon billions of dollars. I'm not trying to say piracy is okay, but usually there's a big common misconception on a lot of online debates where people say, piracy is exactly the one thing that killed that system, and I'm glad Nintendo stamped it out. No, there's a lot of reasons why gaming systems die. Circumventing copy protection isn't the entire reason, okay? It's one small reason, but it's not the primary reason. Anyways, let's get on further. So this story leads us into SXOS, which is one of the big principal reasons why Team Zecutor was brought so hard onto. Now, the Nintendo Switch is a big system for Nintendo at the time, and currently, at the moment, the only way to hack a Nintendo Switch is by having a first-generation Switch, as far as I know. Now, when the Switch first came out, this was a collaboration between Nintendo and NVIDIA. NVIDIA is, providing the chipset that powers the Nintendo Switch, which is the NVIDIA Tegra. I think it's the K1 or X1, whichever the one it is. It's an NVIDIA Tegra chipset. Now, there wasn't an actual hardware bypass. There was a hardware circumvention where on the right Joy-Con rail, where you basically slap the Joy-Con onto, if you put in a jig, basically by hitting a few pins and then launching a payload over the USB 3.0 port underneath the Nintendo Switch, you would be able to launch third-party code. You would be able to launch third-party custom firmware. Through third-party custom firmware, you were actually able to launch various pieces of homebrew, things like emulators. You were able to launch Linux. You might have even been able to get Android running underneath it and then play Android games that way. And of course, because third-party access was allowed, you could in fact run pirated video games. In fact, SXOS were the actual people billing that feature to begin with. Now, I don't promote piracy in that regards either, and what SXOS did was even worse, because not only did they actually give you this tool, but they actually implemented their own DRM. Imagine a tool designed to allow piracy would have its own DRM solutions onto it so people couldn't pirate their own software. It's fucking insane. But anyways, SXOS came out and it was selling well because, hey, Nintendo Switch is hot material. And if somebody can pay like $60 to get access to a device that could save them hundreds of dollars through the act of piracy, then obviously you can see how alluring that would be. Now, of course, running that on a Switch was one of the biggest pivotal points because a hardware bypass that existed on the Switch would mean that no matter how much you updated the Switch to circumvent the hack, you couldn't bypass it because it was built right into, it was a hardware flaw to begin with. This is why if you buy a recent Nintendo Switch or Nintendo Switch OLED or a Nintendo Switch Mini, you're actually not able to achieve this hack because the hardware exploit has since been patched in the actual manufacturing process. Basically, if you bought a Switch day one or in that launch phase period, you are good to hack that thing till the end of days. Now, of course, I don't think hacking is that big of a deal anymore on the Nintendo Switch because emulators like Ryujinx and Yuzu are so powerful that I don't think people are going to go out of their way to hack a Nintendo Switch to run a few games, when in reality, it's much more simpler to run your backed up games on an actual emulator and achieve higher frame rates and resolutions. But then again, I don't want to get canceled by saying emulation is okay. Actually, I don't fucking care. If you think emulation is wrong and I'm a terrible person for supporting it, well, we're going to agree to disagree. But anyways, I don't want to clutch Nintendo's legal team even harder. Let's go on. Now, to understand, Gary Bowser, not to be confused with Doug Bowser, current president of Nintendo of America, basically, I think if your last name is Bowser, you're just like fucking drawn to Nintendo shit, was actually charged and apparently given over 3 years in prison, all right, on top of like $14+ million that Nintendo is seeking out of the guy. This is an insane little thing that happened. Basically, if you've been around, you can read the DOJ indictment right over here from 2020. Now, to understand, Gary Bowser probably didn't have $14 million to hand off over to Nintendo, and so I think jail time was something that was on the table. Usually in the legal system, jail time and financial restitution are kind of like hand in hand, unfortunately. And in this case, while Gary Bowser's legal team, I think, claimed that they made like somewhere around like $300,000, I think that's all the prosecution could like prove, so they just went with that figure. I think he probably made a bit over that in my personal experience, in my personal opinion. I would think that that's what Gary Bowser was pulling in. He probably pulled in a little bit over $300,000, but do I think Gary Bowser made anywhere close to $14 million? No, not even close to that scenario. Now, of course, you can read the indictment for yourself over here. This is from like 2020, of course. And in this indictment, they cover a lot of things like mod chips, emulators, ROMs, exploits, homebrew, pirated. But I think what's really important is talking about the actual indictment in this case. Now, for what they were going after, where they were going after Max Luarn, who I believe is still like not busted at the moment. Like, this person's from France. They're just they're kind of doing their own thing. Yuaning Shen, who also I believe is not busted. The only one in this situation that has faced an arrest, that has faced the consequences, is Gary Bowser. So let's go over some of this actual indictment. For instance, they talk about the actual history of Team Executor, so you can actually look inside and see various products from them. One of the key ones was obviously SXOS. But of course, if you go down, they cover a bunch of other tools. They cover a bunch of retailers that they used. For instance, they even talked about the Gateway 3DS, which were flashcards for running 3DS ROMs on an actual, 3DS device. Then you've also got Stargate, which back in the day, I actually was considering getting these, little cartridges just so I could run ROMs on my actual 3DS, just back up some of those games. They covered True Blue Mini, which was the ability for you to, I believe, connect an actual USB drive to the PlayStation Classic device that was released and run some PlayStation games. So you can see that what's kind of happening over here is they're releasing a bunch of tools that are meant to circumvent the copy protection and run ROMs on a lot of these official devices, which no one was really accepting. Now, then you got to Classic 2 Magic, which was one of the other second little bullet points that leads into, I believe, why Gary Bowser was actually arrested. Now, the Classic 2 Magic allowed users to make unauthorized copies of original video game cartridges and to save those versions onto a USB drive. So basically ROM backups through the use of their hardware. Again, it's very common for any tool to provide that service. Second, Classic 2 Magic contained a USB port that allowed the users to play ROM that had been downloaded onto a USB device, thus circumventing the technological measures that limited the console to operating only the pre-installed games. On the website AxioGame.com, they advertised that using the Classic 2 Magic was as easy as copying a file onto a USB drive, and they supported game ROMs from any region. God damn! In fact, you can see right over here, motherfuckers be playing some Street Fighter 2 on the old... That's not okay! Now, you might be wondering, but Muda, how is it that these guys are able to shut down mod chip creators when there's so many people that make mod chips out there? Hey, if you go to Amazon right now, there's so many people that are selling you gaming consoles with preloaded preloaded Nintendo ROMs. Why is Nintendo not going after them? Well, one of the things about criminal acts is you should probably not be keeping notes or emails in this regard. Now, in the United States, indictment, they actually mentioned in the overt acts, if you actually go down over here, a couple damning emails were sent regarding the Classic 2 Magic. So let's actually look over here. Bowser sent an email to prospective business partners in 2018 that provided a status report regarding Team Executor's various projects. Bowser indicated that the conspiracy was responding to enforcement efforts focused on removing ROMs from the internet. And so basically when Nintendo's lawyers go after ROM sites, this is what we're trying to circumvent. They've been trying hard to crack down on everything, removing ROMs from various sites, which devices like Classic 2 Magic needs. But we have a plan in the works to have secure links to these retro ROM packs on a protected server, so it will not be a problem. So not only were you actually allegedly, like in this case, selling the ROM chips, but then you were talking about running protected servers for hosting some of these retro ROM packs, which, I don't have to remind you, is pretty fucking illegal. So if you can imagine, this is why you're facing, jail time and a pretty heavy, financial restitution. This is why. This is the silver bullet amongst the various silver bullets you saw in this situation. Now, do I think that Gary Bowser should get years in prison over this? To be honest with you, I don't think this is a prison offense. I believe financial restitution was okay, but I actually think the actual crime that was committed was not worthy of facing actual jail time. Jail time, I think, is really heavy in regards to what you're actually getting in this situation. But then again, may I remind you, this was not a man that poked the bear. This is a man that stuck his dick deep into the bear's asshole and basically expected nothing bad would ever actually happen. Well, may I remind you, if that is to occur, and the bear in this case is Nintendo, Nintendo is not going to take that lying down. Nintendo's going to get up, go to their legal team, which I'm pretty sure gets paid more than the development branches, and definitely go to town taking care of bad people like this, alright, in their eyes. Now, to understand, when you're dealing with a company like Nintendo, who, if you look into the actual calculations that I guess are allegedly being thrown out, it kind of makes you laugh a little bit. I think the US government prosecution argued that the Team Executor actions resulted in $65 million in losses for Nintendo, and even they asked for 5 years imprisonment for Bowser, of course. Now, to understand, do I think $65 million worth of damages were actually caused? I'd have to imagine maybe, if we're talking about the entire history of mod chips running in the entire scheme. But then again, go back to the beginning of the video, how much billions of dollars was Nintendo sort of raking in because of this? I don't know. Things are a little questionable and sussy-wussy in the lands of money being made. I will say, going to prison over mod chips is pretty pathetic. And I will have to say that Gary Bowser's probably going to be spending his time in like a good, like a white collar prison, you know, not something like Supermax or, you know, like a high security prison or anything. I don't think that's going to happen. But a few years in prison for basically poking a bear throughout your entire career seems like a little excessive. But at the end of the day, when you've been going up against a company as large as Nintendo and incredibly litigious, I can't say that it's wholly unexpected. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that being said, this is the fun story of Team Zecutor, and actually the story finally has an end. This is the end. I don't think this team is going to be getting back together anymore. Maybe the two people who are currently like fugitive status are probably going to run away and make their own new brand in some capacity. But as far as Gary's days have gone, I don't think Gary's going to be touching Mod Chips. I don't even think Gary's going to be allowed. I think Gary, after he leaves prison, is probably going to be surveillance for a long time because of this situation. When it comes to big corporations like this, they don't fuck around, all right? It takes years in the making, but unfortunately, indictments like this get handed out. And listen, I can always sit and wholly agree that piracy, while it's wrong, what always scares me is the precedent that when it comes to mod chips and modifying the hardware that you buy comes into question legally is the big issue for me. I think when you buy a system and it's well past the point of its best use state and it's well past the point of even being supported by the company, like the original DS, like even the 3DS at this point, even the Vita or any device, you should be wholly allowed to play around and hack around with it. When it comes to piracy on an actual active system, yeah, and you get taken down like this, I can't say that I'm surprised. And I can't even say that at the end of the day, it's really unwarranted. But that said, though, ladies and gentlemen, this is the story of Team Zecutor. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. I am out.